Hello everyone! In this short video I would like to talk to you about the subject of pelvic floors. Now, pelvic floors create all sorts of issues for some of us at various points in our life, and it's an important subject to get right. So there's a whole bunch of inputs that goes into the health of our pelvic floor. One of the key inputs is good breathing mechanics. So if you imagine you have a balloon, and which is your rib cage and abdomen, and if you are breathing in a way that helps expel the air out when you're squeezing your lower ribs as you exhale, it's very similar to squashing a balloon from its middle all the time. If you imagine squashing a balloon in the middle, you will have pressure popping upwards and downwards. The downwards portion is what we're particularly interested in here, is the portion that pushes the pressure down onto the pelvic floor. So one of the key elements to review is how your rib cage moves. With an inhale, does it expand? With an exhale, does your body get that impetus to squeeze the air out with the lower ribs? And if it does, do you have a sense of heaviness into the pelvic floor? We can actually assess for that ourselves by feeling with our hand in the pelvic floor area, and as you exhale, do you have a sense of bulging, bearing down into the pelvic floor? It's very similar to a self-assessment to compare that to a sensation you might get down there when you are going to the bathroom and you're trying to finish the job quickly and strain, and something will happen, like for example during constipation. It's the same sense of heaviness down there, and we need to recognize that that sense of heaviness we get with bearing down when we're constipated. We shouldn't be doing that, but we sometimes do, and it's the same pressure that we can generate during our breathing. And when we recognize the signs of bearing down, then we know that we are using our rib cage too forcefully during your exhalation. So working on rib cage mobility and amazing breathing is so important for the health of the pelvic floor. That is input number one. Input number two is our overall posture and how we are aligned. Now, to many people, posture means all sorts of different things. But by and large, if I stand to you sideways on, the rib cage needs to be sitting over the pelvis needs to be sitting over the feet. If we are, for instance, in this sort of swaying position, then we are not aligned, but our rib cage is lifted upwards here, and our tailbone is sticking behind us with a deeper curve in the spine. Or sometimes some people stand in a position where their tail tucked under, and that creates also a different amount of forces through our body. Neither of those is better or worse. They're both of them, if we are living in that position, they're suboptimal, and that reflects how the tension travels through our body and reflects ultimately in the pelvic floor. So with a tail tucked under position, we're creating lots of constant tightening in the back of the pelvic floor, and the front of the pelvic floor will be longer and potentially weaker. If we're doing that, then potentially we're having the reverse position, as well as having strain in the back and lengthening in the abdomen. So we need to make sure that when we stand relaxed, not straining, not trying to widen our chest artificially, but the rib cage is sitting over the pelvis is sitting over the feet. There is a sense of the lower back being relaxed. There's a sense of the abdomen and chest not being lengthened and lifted up or collapsed inwards. So work on your general alignment. It will really help, and it will reflect in the pelvic floor. Now, the third input is what your feet do. Our feet have a really, really direct connection into the pelvic floor. So if we think about the action of being pronated, which is favoring standing in the arches and dropping the arches into the floor, versus the reverse of it is supinated, like I'm illustrating now, being on the outside edges of your feet. If you swap a little bit from one to another, if you come to a position when you're pronated, so you are in the arches, can you feel that this is a lot of this is tightening in the inner thigh, and you have a sense maybe of lengthening in the outer thighs. And you will have the reverse with the supinated feet. That is a huge simplification. There is a lot more to it than going on there. But your feet, if they're not in a ready position and if they don't pronate well and supinate well when needed, then we will have all sorts of things taking that stretch of muscles up the chain into the hips, into the inner thigh areas, and creating distortions on the pelvic floor, which, if we're constantly favoring one situation with the feet, it will reflect in the rest of the body. So what we can do is, if we have a spiky ball, or you can invest in one, they are about 5 or 6 pounds, or you can have a massage ball, anything like this, anything hard and small to grab. We can start doing certain things with it. So make sure it's not too hard. If it's rock hard, the next one will not work. We can actually start massaging out the feet. It creates not just sensory awareness into the feet, but also there's a change in connective tissues, and there's loads and loads in the foot. And we can start getting those connective tissues mobilized, and the feet become more pliable. And therefore there's a sense of working the muscles in a slightly different way around your ankle, your foot, and up the chain. And for some people this can be excruciatingly tricky to start off with. For some people it's absolutely fine. So just have a try. So we can massage out the feet, which is a very nice way to wake up the feet in the morning. We can spend 1 or 2 minutes doing this. I'm not going to do this for 2 minutes, otherwise you will be a little bit bored. However, massaging out the feet is one way of quickly saying hello to your feet, but there's a lot more to it than that. So for example, if you're favoring being in the arches of your feet all the time, like pronated feet, maybe that goes with a little bit of a kind of toes turned outwards, maybe it doesn't. What you can do is take the same spiky ball, grip this bit between your heels. You can hold on to something like a chair for balance, because it's not a balancing exercise, and spread the toes as much as you can and connect into the balls of your feet. And then you're going to do some heel lifts, up and down. Now from the side it looks a bit like this. So it's not a huge lift. You can start with like going up, sorry, ball's lost, upwards by 1 inch and then maybe a little bit higher. But you're coming up and you're coming down. As you're coming up, what you're creating in your feet is a greater amount of supination, which is the reverse of pronation. So for people with flatter arches, this one is very good to start waking up the feet after you've massaged out the tissues of the soles of your feet. For people with really high arches, that's much more of a rigid foot. And neither of those positions is better than the other. The foot ideally has both pronation and supination available, because it's extremely important to have both as we walk. As we push off with the foot behind us, we need to have supination going on. As you are weight bearing through your foot and briefly standing on one leg during walking, you are pronated, you're shock absorbing. So we absolutely have to have both. So for more rigid feet, that will be a different approach. So if you have something like a step or a book or a block to stand on, you are literally coming onto that step with the balls of your feet, gripping that spiky or massage ball between your heels. And for you, ladies and gents, the idea is to drop the heels down. And as you drop the heels down, you create more pronation in your arches. and you learn to recognize what that feels like. So these are very quick ideas as to how to start working with your feet. And that movement that you get from better pronation and better supination will travel up your lower legs, up your thighs, into the pelvic floor, into the pelvis, into the rest of your body. Absolutely a full body effect. So that's 3. Number 4 is important to also know that your pelvis and your rib cage have a really direct connection into the pelvic floor. If we have a rib cage that does not like to move, the ribs that don't like to expand, the pelvis that does not know how to move to the right and to the left, then we have a bit of a problem because the body does not really use its movement potential. The pelvic floor will absolutely respond because it will be supporting the structures that might not be moving as designed. So there's a bunch of things we can do. I'm just going to go through a couple of exercises. So first of all, it's important for our thigh bones, they're called femurs, our thigh bone femurs to rotate in the socket. And the rotation can be in and out. Now, we might have a preference on one side to rotate, for example, externally this way better. And on the other side, if you use the assessment, you might not be able to have the same movement in the same direction. It has a direct impact on the pelvic floor because there are some muscles through connective tissues connecting to muscles of the pelvic floor. And if your leg does not move, the pelvic floor does not have that chance to respond. So it's important to preserve what you have and work on what you might be able to open up into. So one good way of mobilizing, and obviously be going into this carefully, is a triangle pose. So when you go into a wide-legged stance, and then you swivel on your, let's say on your left heel, take the left foot outwards, and then the right foot slightly inwards. And you position your heel of your left foot to be in line with the arch of the right. And then just notice, what does your pelvis do? Does your pelvis want to swivel towards the left? Can you turn the pelvis a little bit more, not completely yanking it to be parallel with this line of sight here, but just opening up the pelvis. And we're looking for, does this leg on the left want to externally rotate? And does this leg behind you, that's turned inwards, want to internally rotate? How does that feel in your hips? You're taking the arms out to the sides, palms turned up to the sky, and we're going to hinge in the hips. So you're going to allow your left hip to drop, right hip to come out to the right, and you're taking yourself off to the side without rounding the spine, without lifting the chest. So just as much as your mobility allows you, until you are reaching somewhere, you might be reaching your thigh, and that's fine. You might be reaching your knee, that's also fine. Some people might be reaching lower down. But we need to keep a sense of your spine being long and your back being long. And as you come out of this, as you exhale, you're releasing out of that. We're going to do the other side in exactly the same way, but the other side might be different. So if we turn and swivel on the heel to take the right leg out to point towards your right wall, the left foot inwards, heel of your right leg foot to be in line with the arch of the left, you're going to be seeing whether that right leg wants to externally rotate and the left leg to internally rotate. And does your pelvis feel like it has a different movement preference? Does it want to be looking forwards? Or does it get pulled off to the side, to your right, more or less so than the other side? Arms out to the side, palms turning up to the sky. Lengthen from the spine. So imagine there's a line from your pubic bone up through the middle of your chest to the crown of your head. Keep that line nice and long. Chest is not lifting or dropping into the spine. As you exhale, you're going to shift your pelvis to the left. Allow yourself to hinge from this fold with the leg as you're leaning sideways, and you're not allowing your body to side bend. You are doing a hip hinge. The moment you stop doing a hip hinge, that's when you stop. And you're noticing where your movement comes from and how far you're comfortably going, whether that feels different. Now, if you look at your foot, your right foot in this case, does that right foot want to drop into the arch, like a really strong pronation? Does that foot want to sit on the outside edge? Or do you have a sense of a contact between your big toe, your little toe, the center of your heel? And the next time you exhale, you come up. Now, coming up of this position is just as important as going into this. As we're coming out of this position and as we're staying in that position, with the breathing, we're noticing, do we have a sense of heaviness in the pelvic floor, like a sense of bearing down? Or is there a sense of that pelvic floor responding calmly and comfortably to this challenge? I'm going to show you one last movement, which is great for opening up the hips generally and for lengthening the pelvic floor, because typically this is what we're lacking, is the length in the pelvic floor. This position is called the goddess position. It's a yoga pose, or rather it comes from the tradition of yoga type exercises. The true yoga tradition, of course, it's a lot more meditative and mind-centric. But this is from the series of kind of traditional exercises which is wrapped up in the concept of yoga. So what we're going to do is we're going to swivel on the heels to take the feet pointing in the outward direction. And again, you're going to have a sense of that long spine. From the side, if you're in this wide-legged position, we're not rounding the spine, we're not sticking the tail out like so massively. We're going to start bending the knees and sinking downwards without compromising the length in the spine. So from the front, it will look like so. So imagine you're pushing the knees apart. You're sinking down as you exhale. You might have your hands folded lightly in front of your chest. Keep pressing the knees wide. Imagine your knees are pressing over your second toe. Now, what's important once you're down there in that position is that your tail has not tucked under between your legs. This is what happens really commonly. So allow your tail to be untucked and you're hinging forward gently from the hips. You're not going to this level. You're going to imagine you're supporting somebody on your back as you're pressing the knees wide. Inhale here. As you exhale, press into the feet and come back up. And we can do this a number of times. So again, next time you exhale, wide knees, pressing the knees open, sinking down, staying there for another breath. Take a breath in. Exhale. You can blow the air out through a little hole in your mouth and push into your feet, slowly coming back up, all the way back up. And you do a number of repeats. So this really starts opening and challenging those little hip rotators here. It gives us length in the inner thighs. It gives a challenge to the buttock areas in the lower portions, and it teaches us how to control the pelvic position, because where we're very often lacking is this mobility of the pelvis. Does the pelvis want to move here forwards and swishing back? Or is the pelvis less keen to do this? And it will have a direct bearing on what the pelvic floor does or doesn't do. So if anyone's told you you need to do your Kegels, squeeze, squeeze, squeeze down there, and that's your exercise regime for a weak bladder or a prolapse or anything like this, does it make sense that the pelvic floor, with its connections through the muscle layers to all sorts of areas in the body, the feet, the pelvis, the legs, the rib cage, etc., it's a whole body approach. So giving some people an isolated set of squeezes addresses none of the other variables that are so important for the healthy pelvic floor. I hope that you found this useful. Let me know if you've got any questions, and please let me know your feedback. Follow me on social media and stay in touch. Grab my newsletter, and I look forward to hearing from you, and I love to interact with people. So ask me anything, and I hope that was beneficial. Have a lovely rest of your day.